Paul, how are you? Paul, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hey, good morning. How is it going today?
Good. Did you have a question?
No, I was wondering if we're going to talk about this cybersecurity and how it's affecting everybody.
Well, it's not my area of expertise, so we'll wait for others to join. I see Larry in the crowd. Larry, how are you?
Great, Yaman. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's fun to be here.
What do you think about this cybersecurity attack?
Well, somebody said to me this morning that they thought it was Microsoft doing it on purpose in order to destroy, their competition. So who knows? I mean, it's a pretty serious mistake to be making, and it's a pretty, amateurish mistake for a company like CrowdStrike. I mean, you'd think that any new push would be subject to some very stringent tests, and well, it's obviously they tested it, they just never tried it in an actual Windows computer. So it's extraordinary. It's a tremendous failure, and I think the company's going to be very hard pressed to survive this.
X Network. Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, no, does nobody else consider that it could be a test at our security system from foreign countries like China, Russia, Korea?
Larry, do you think this is going to impact CrowdStrike for a long time?
Yeah, I think CrowdStrike are going to be, at the end of a lot of litigation. I think they've suffered a very serious blow. And, for example, Tesla yanked out all of CrowdStrike from all of their computers. That's going to be the reaction from a lot of companies. I know that in our company, the one that I retired from, CrowdStrike was a pain and a suffering for most of our employees. And so, they complained bitterly about it. And this would be an opportunity for them to go back to management and say, look, we're not prepared to put it up. I mean, if they'd come to me and said that, I would have had to do something about it. So this is not looking good. It's not looking good.
Yeah, CrowdStrike is a $75 billion company. That is a
Yeah, but every airline company, every airline in the world is going to be suing them. I mean, the number of the width, the breadth and the width of the damages is such that, and the litigation prospects for a good lawyer or many good lawyers is so appetizing that it's hard to see how they survive this. Maybe they do. I mean, who knows? But it seems very difficult to me. Very difficult. I'd hate to be on the wrong side of that litigation.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it this morning too. The litigation risk is going to be huge. I mean, so many companies, so many industries impacted. Would you short the stock here then?
Oh, I don't. I don't short stocks. I'm not. I'm not a speculator. Is it? Would it be a good play for somebody who does? Yeah, I think so. I think that I don't think the impact in the marketplace is yet close to where it's going to get to. So I think it's probably a good short play for somebody who does that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the stock is down 10%, $75 billion stock. Their PE ratio is high. Let's go to Paul Ryan.
Yeah, I'm in the airline industry, and I can tell you that it's not looking good for us because dispatch has canceled all flights indefinitely. So a lot of people are going to be displaced. This is going to be a very huge affecting snowballing event. So not sure what it's going to do to CrowdStrike, but I wouldn't be surprised if they bankrupt.
Wow, you think they're going to go bankrupt after this?
I mean, think about the implications of an industry, uh, just just one industry, whether it's the airlines. You're talking about millions, perhaps billions of dollars lost in one day. The airports are in chaos right now. I'm on the cargo side of things, and we're losing a lot of money. FedEx is not happy. I'm a pilot sitting in a hotel right now, being paid per diem, and I have nowhere to go because the ATC system is down. Individual airplanes are okay in case anyone's worried. GPS and all that doesn't have this type of security that you need on Microsoft desktops or servers, but it definitely is affecting true like I guess you call it a trickle down effect.
Yeah, I mean the impact of this is really hard to measure, very, very hard to measure. And so the litigation prospects for many, many good litigious lawyers is very high. So I would be, if I were in CrowdStrike's shoes right now, I'd probably start checking my resume and start checking the market. It's going to be very difficult.
Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can point the majority of the fingers at CrowdStrike here. I mean, I'm not fully versed on what else going on, but from what I understand, this stems down to a Microsoft, issue, and I think a lot of our things run on Microsoft. I think today we were reminded that, but it's easy to point fingers at CrowdStrike because the issue stems with them. But I mean, can we discuss the fact that Microsoft clearly isn't vetting these patches very well? I mean, we're seeing a vulnerability here in the workflow of, yeah. So did it get to the point to where CrowdStrike was just able to push out patches without them being vetted by Microsoft? I mean, good Lord, that's a liability right there.
I don't see how it's Microsoft's fault. I mean, Microsoft's an operating system, CrowdStrike's an application. I don't understand how Microsoft is in the firing line. I mean, in theory, maybe Microsoft shouldn't allow anybody to put anything on the computer that would affect the boot kernel. But it didn't. It wasn't affecting the boot kernel. I mean, any antivirus software has to be at a pretty low level in the OS, and so that's what CrowdStrike does so well. I mean, this is a CrowdStrike failure, unquestionably. And how do you actually push a piece of software, no matter how well you test it electronically, how well you test it automatically, you put it on a current Microsoft computer and you test it yourself physically, by the old-fashioned method. And you do that on multiple different implementations and multiple different sources. Obviously, all they did is test it, automatically in the automatic testing cycle. It went through whatever the deployment cycle, testing cycle is at CrowdStrike, and then was deployed. So it's absolutely CrowdStrike's problem. It's not Microsoft's problem. In fact, sorry.
So Larry, just to confirm, because I don't know as much as you do on this, is this only affecting computers that A, run Microsoft Windows or Microsoft in general, and B, did the users of these machines that are having issues download CrowdStrike and they are CrowdStrike customers, or is CrowdStrike embedded into all Windows operating systems? I'm just confused on that.
No, you're correct that it's only CrowdStrike, only Windows computers that have CrowdStrike installed, and that's that CrowdStrike installation is is because the users of the CrowdStrike application have bought a CrowdStrike in order to protect their Windows computers. Now it's up to CrowdStrike's sole responsibility to ensure that it works well with Windows. And it's up to the buyer's sole responsibility to decide to install that CrowdStrike software. Now, CrowdStrike works at a very deep level on the operating system. It has to, because it's there to prevent, the system being damaged or being affected by a cyber attack. And so, Microsoft allows this level of installation, and the client makes the decision based upon their confidence of CrowdStrike and its professionalism to install it. So Microsoft's certainly not to blame, other than the fact that Windows is a 30-year-old operating system or has 30-year-old code in it, and who knows what's buried in there. So running Windows is just a bad idea in general, but it's what we do.
And in YouTube live chat, Haresh says Microsoft doesn't have to vet software updates of applications. Let's go to Uzi Obi. Uzi Obi, go ahead.
Hey, Larry, thank you for the explanation. So I just want to clarify, because CrowdStrike is, I guess, a software provider, they're completely liable for this outage and they could be sued. And why can they be sued?
Well, they can be sued for the very reason that they've done damage to their clients' computers. They've installed software on the computers that have disabled the computer's ability to operate. And if you look at the code, it's very clear what the problem is. And if you look at the impact of the software on the computer, it's very clear. And that's actually quite simple to clean the computer up. As long as you have access to as long as you have privileges that allow you into the kernel, you can delete the file that caused the problem, and you're good to go. The problem is that 9/10 of Microsoft users are corporate users. They don't have access to the kernel, and then so the whole rollout of this fix is so complicated. The best solution is just to delete CrowdStrike off the servers, the corporate servers, and then disable CrowdStrike entirely from the corporate point of view, and everybody can get up and running. Corporations are very reluctant to do that simply because it makes all those computers out there vulnerable to viruses.
Let's go to Matthew, and now let's get Omar's views on this. Matthew, please unmute yourself. Okay, Omar.
Yeah. What aspect of the CrowdStrike are you curious about?
Well, let's first try to understand, because most of the space isn't really experienced about the topic. So maybe explain what's actually happening. Also, a downside risk, like somebody earlier said that CrowdStrike won't survive this, and then we're going to switch to Tesla later.
Well, CrowdStrike is a cybersecurity company. Think of them kind of like an antivirus that you install on your computer that helps prevent you from cyber attacks that take your network down. Now, the irony here is CrowdStrike actually took the network down. They didn't even have to wait for an attack. They took you down themselves. So, if you think about a computer operating system, every computer has an operating system on it. What is an operating system? An operating system is a program that lets you run other programs essentially and manages it. And the core of the operating system is called the kernel. That's the main sort of executable portion. Now, sometimes you can attach into the kernel. You can have a kernel extension or a driver where third-party code, for example, CrowdStrike's code, gets loaded into the kernel. Now, CrowdStrike pushed a software update to their kernel extension or driver that had a bug in it that caused the kernel to crash. And as a result, the computers couldn't boot up anymore. So if I were CrowdStrike, I probably would have covered my ass in the end user license agreement and said something like, hey, any downtime that we cause or, that gets through because of our failure to do something, we settle that through arbitration or something like that. So I'm not sure what exactly their agreement is, but my guess is they'll probably survive this with their reputation severely diminished and probably losing several customers, if not the majority of them.
billion-dollar company that's down 10% today. Would you short the stock here?
Personally, I wouldn't. I tend to not short companies. Shorting is tough to do. I'm not convinced this is a slam dunk short here.
Humanities?
Yeah, I'll give you a little background. I don't want to portray myself as a security expert, but I was a director for a large security company. I was in the software development side, so not in the security side, but I worked on a lot of their stuff, and I knew all those people. I can tell you, I also did consulting for many years. I have a consulting company that I'm now retired, but that's what I did. I can tell you that every single one of these companies are having meetings right now at the executive level, and they are looking for a replacement. What happened? I honestly didn't know. I kind of looked it up and read on it real quick. It's really bad, and everyone is going to be looking to get rid of that software if they're able to. Now they're not always able to, right? And one other thing I would add to what Omar said is when you have access to the kernel, that's full permission, full admin access if you're doing anything with the kernel and getting access at that level of a operating system, which means that if depending on what exactly happened, it could be catastrophic. So this is very serious. And if I owned any stock in the company, and I'm not giving financial advice, I would sell every bit of it.
Would you short it?
I'm going to go with Larry on that. I don't do such things. I don't like shorts.
I mean, it is essentially the same thing. Selling a stock versus shorting it is just kind of going from positive to zero to negative. It's the same exact thing. Michelle?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's another aspect while mitigating this morning. We showed a lot of users that they could go in safe mode and oh wow, there's no passwords. And then some critical situation we had to give some sort of local password that we don't usually give to users. So there's like weeks of fixing what we've had to use this morning to like mitigate the rest of what we have. Like during the mitigation, it let us like we had to expose some security to people that don't usually have that information. So there's more work for us for the rest of the week.
Thank you, Michelle. Paul Ryan.
Yeah, and to kind of go along with everyone's points, I mean, I'm not a software expert. I definitely had my time in software engineering, but that's past. But what I was going to say is, the stock market is very emotional. It's unfortunate that it's not based on companies' products. It's the emotion of people. And right now, this is a bad taste for everyone that this is affecting the world, not just, say, one product. And I really don't see how they can come back from it. But once again, I don't know enough to say about that. But for me, this is something that I think people are going to remember. And unfortunately, the name is going to be tied with this event, and it's going to be something that's going to be talked about for a very long time. So it's going to be very difficult.
Okay, Brian. All right, switching topics. We have a lot to talk about today. Omar, let's kind of pivot to Tesla with Elon's comments that this is bringing down the entire. Actually, let me just. I don't want to. Here's the top at the top of your screen. This quote. This gave a seizure to the automotive supply chain. What do you think about that?
Oh, he tweeted that?
Yeah, I pinned it at the top. He replied to Satya Nadella.
Well, yeah, I can imagine a lot of their suppliers were probably affected by this. So I don't think it's going to be arresting, but it's, a minor hiccup. So there may be some downtime in their suppliers or maybe even within Tesla as a result of this, but I'm not sure it's going to be material. We'll have to see how long it takes them to resolve it.
Omar, it's not the software that's causing the problem. It's that the aircraft are down. The suppliers that normally come in by air are going to be delayed by up to a week. Because firstly,
Right.
all aircraft are down. Now to start the whole system back up again is going to take several days. So it's going to be a while.
Well, I mean, I think obviously some flights were delayed, some flights were grounded, but I don't expect this to be something that, takes weeks and weeks to resolve. People are pretty smart. They figure out ways around it. It's a disruption, but there's some type of disruption virtually every single quarter. So how much is the impact of this going to be? Is it going to be material? I see it as probably a bump in the road, although from all accounts, it is the biggest IT disaster ever.
Okay, you're right, it won't take weeks, but if you looked at aircraft flight situation, I mean, aircraft are down, literally, there's nothing flying, literally. I mean, if you look at, I'm not exaggerating. If you look at the flights in the air right now, they're down like about 90%. So there's definitely going to be about a 2 to 3 day delay in deliveries. And that's just flights. I'm not dealing with, all the supply chain software, which is going to take a long time to get back up and synchronize. So I wouldn't say this is a small bump in the road. This is a fairly significant bump in the road. I think it's going to affect everybody.
When you say everybody, you mean every company in the auto industry, or like literally every company?
Yeah, every company that deals with molecules. I mean, obviously, people who deal in, who depend upon electronics, some of them were affected, but not for very long. I mean, it's a very quick fix. It's an extremely quick fix, unless you're an enterprise. If you're an enterprise and you have to fix 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 computers, it's not such a quick fix. It takes a lot of work to do this at a corporate level. But bringing these systems back up and getting them synchronized and getting them operational is not simple. It is very complicated when you have a global outage.
Thank you, Larry. Good to have you on the board, as always. Humanities.
Yeah. One other thing is, let's hope that this didn't expose any other vulnerabilities. Because some of the software I worked on was processing enormous amounts of data, terabytes that were coming in rapidly. 100% CPU usage on these massive machines, and if the amount of attempted detrimental attacks against a large corporation are just mind-boggling, and if it exposed any vulnerability whereby somebody could attack a enterprise's computer system, it's just going to get worse. And I know that's speculation, but I'm trying to point out how serious this is. I think Larry nailed it, but this is extremely serious.
Thank you. Paul Ryan.
And if I may, yeah, I have an email I just got from my company. It's only about, I don't know, 20, 30 words. Can I share that?
Yes, please.
All right. It says, I won't say the name of my company just for security reasons, but it says that travel and operation teams are closely monitoring the cybersecurity issue that is currently disrupting several air carrier operations this morning. The impact of this outage is expected to last throughout the morning and possibly into this afternoon. We urge you to closely monitor the status of your commercial flight via the airline websites. Please ensure to work with the airlines for rebooking if needed. So that's kind of, I guess, the abbreviated email we received just now regarding the outage. What do you think about that, Larry?
Yeah, the outage is going to be, it's going to be fixed by this evening simply because, CrowdStrike can be deleted so easily. That there's no doubt about it. But to get flights back in the air, synchronized, to reorganize, bills of lading, to reorganize passengers and so on and so forth, that's going to take a few days. So, the good thing about this CrowdStrike is that it's so quickly fixed. The bad thing about CrowdStrike is that what doesn't get fixed quickly is all the backlog of organization and structure, and so that's what's going to take the time.
Thank you. Wes Hicks.
Hey, Yaman. Yeah, it looks like air traffic control and the FAA, their systems are working fine. I think somebody said otherwise a moment ago, but agreeing with Larry that, or what it seems to me, and what little bit I know right now, is it's the airlines and potentially even the airports. Of course, it's not limited to the airline industry, but I just want to point out that ATC, air traffic control, seems to be up and running.
Omar.
Yeah, I'm not really that worried about this. I think it'll be resolved relatively quickly. If you compare to, for example, the CDK outage of last quarter, that was probably worse than this because you had an actual malicious actor with a ransomware attack. This wasn't a ransomware attack. This is just some dumbass who made a mistake. So all you really need to do is reboot the computer, boot it into safe mode, and delete that kernel extension, and your computer will work. So, it takes actually going to the computer and rebooting it, which may be an issue for some of these servers and computers in the background, but it's a relatively simple fix. I mean, for these critical systems that are down, you bet there is a fire lit under the ass of the IT team to get those critical systems up as soon as possible. So I think that it'll be probably totally fine by Monday.
That said, who's a listener right now, if he wants to come up and talk about it, he's in the automotive supply chain. He said it's a good thing that this is happening on a Friday. By Monday, most systems should be up and running. And Elon replied to Alex a couple of times. Alex, would you like to talk about that on the topic?
Well, I think we covered it. I think he replied twice about, like, this being in the supply chain and logistics chain. So I think he's probably, Tesla has been affected by this. The suppliers that supply Tesla have been affected. Maybe also SpaceX. I don't think Neuralink and XAI and all that would have been affected. But yeah, he's pretty mad. He's going hard on Microsoft and CrowdStrike.
Okay. Sapphire on CrowdStrike. I think that's enough time. Let's switch to last night's speech. Trump gave a speech and he said he's on day one, he's going to remove EV mandates. Omar, what do you think?
Yeah, not really anything new here. Pretty consistent with what he's been saying before. The EV mandates, as he refers to them, um, are not really a mandate at all, right? So a mandate is when you say you have to buy an EV, right? For example, you could say all sales of gas cars are banned by 2030, right? That would be a mandate. This is not a mandate. The Biden administration hasn't proposed a mandate, but critics argue that it's a de facto mandate. And what they've actually done is they've set the corporate average fuel economy standard. So as you know, the EPA and NHTSA, they set emission standards. They say, hey, manufacturers, you need to have an average fuel economy across your cars of, let's say, 25 or 30 miles per gallon. So they tell you how efficient your cars need to be, and they usually need to get more efficient over time. So the Biden administration has set really tough standards. I think something like 50 miles per gallon by 2037 or something like that, 2032 to 2037 period. And this has obviously freaked out the automakers because they're looking at this and they're saying, well, how do we achieve an average fuel economy of 50 miles per gallon unless we're making a huge number of EVs, right? I mean, in theory, you could have some super efficient gas engine. You could only sell Priuses and you'd comply. You don't have to necessarily make EVs. But in a de facto sense, you kind of have to make EVs. So Trump can unilaterally, as the head of the executive branch, change those fuel economy standards to anything he likes. If he wants to relax them, he can tell his new EPA director, and it's a director, to set a more appropriate fuel economy standard. And it seems like they're probably going to do that. And then as a result, automakers won't have to, produce cars that are as efficient. So the automakers have been begging for this for a long time. He can kind of do it unilaterally. A lot of people kind of misunderstood this to mean that he was going to take away the tax credit, which he also wants to do. He also wants to take away the EV tax credit, but that requires an act of Congress, and he can't just sort of, unilaterally do it, though he can put additional restrictions on. So overall, not really anything new here. He wants to relax fuel economy standards. He wants to remove the EV tax credit. In my view, this will probably result in a situation where Tesla has more of the market to themselves. We've already seen automakers pulling back from EVs across the board. Ford taking their EV factory that they were going to build and building Ford Super Duty trucks there instead. GM, similar story. Stellantis, similar story. So I see it as probably being good for Tesla overall. I think they'll be on a more level playing field. And since they're the only profitable EV maker, they'll probably do very well. But for other automakers that are not making enough EVs, it'll be a temporary sigh of relief. It'll be a temporary sort of easing of the financial burden. But ultimately, I believe it's going to accelerate their demise because they need to be making the cars of the future, regardless of what fuel economy standards dictate.
Thank you. Dallas.
Yeah, I don't see this as a negative for Tesla at all. I think Tesla, kind of like Omar was just saying, is an exception to a lot of the other EV brands out there that their product speaks for themselves. Great software, great hardware, manufacturing processes. I mean, you name it. I live by the standard of as little government intervention as possible is the best. So personally, in my opinion, I think this is a good thing. I don't worry about Tesla at all in this case because I do believe that their products sell themselves.
Michael.
Yeah, so I would say that oil and gas is subsidized by billions of dollars per year, and this will, if Tesla loses the EV tax credit, as well as the corporate average fuel economy standards are changed, that will have multi-billion-dollar impact on Tesla. And I've done the math. The EV tax credits are going to be around $3.4 billion impact per year. They also get automotive regulatory credits that they sell to other automakers who are not complying with the corporate average fuel economy standards, and that's hundreds of millions of dollars per year. And then they also receive from the IRA billions of dollars of battery incentives, and it's going to be it's in the billions already. It will be keep going up towards 1.4 billion. And also they benefit from the 30% investment tax credit for energy storage products and solar products. And both Trump and Republicans want to take those away. It will have a multi-billion-dollar impact on Tesla. I estimate close to $6-7 billion of lost incentives, and that's like 2 of the current Texas 50,000 GPU NVIDIA clusters. So it's a huge impact. And yes, Trump can't do it without act of Congress, but as Omar mentioned, he can make the restrictions more restrictive unilaterally.
Omar.
Yeah, I'm not really sure I agree with that analysis necessarily. The EV mandate that he's talking about is just related to the fuel economy standard. So most of the regulatory credit revenue that Tesla receives is not from the federal government's fuel economy standards. The fuel economy standards are relatively easy to meet. Most of their EV credit revenue is coming from California's ZEV standard, Europe, China, and other places. So when we really talk about the IRA, I find it hard to believe that the IRA is going to be just repealed completely. So you'd really need Republicans to not only win the White House, but win both houses of Congress. And then even if Republicans took both houses of Congress, many red states are benefiting immensely from provisions of the IRA. I could see the EV tax credit itself going away, but in terms of the battery credits or the credits on solar or things like that, I think that's probably going to be a little bit harder to repeal. there's a lot of battery gigafactories that have been announced in Republican states because of those IRA incentives. And I don't see Republicans who represent those states necessarily wanting to give them up too easy. And really, when you just look at the data, I mean, I posted a sales chart, right? We said, oh my God, EV tax credit sales are going to skyrocket. That didn't happen. And I think a big part of why it didn't happen is because of hybrids and because of all these sort of unprofitable EV models from every company under the sun that flooded the market. And hybrid sales have surged and EV sales have become flat. So, you can say, oh my God, this is $1 billion loss for Tesla. But when you look at the comparative advantage compared to hybrids and other EVs that aren't making money, they're actually going to be in a stronger competitive position because it's not just them who would lose access to the credit. In addition, it also is really going to simplify their operations from a supply chain and battery perspective. So there's going to be some cost reductions there as well.
Humanities, then Tesla fanboy, then Michael, then Larry.
Yeah, whenever I hear things like this, one of the things I do is go look at any treaties that the United States has entered into that might affect this, and I did that with Grok, and we don't have any treaties. But what I found interesting is that we re-entered the Paris Agreement that Trump got us out of, and after he was elected in 2016, we officially rejoined in 2021. And I wonder if that's what he's referring to, is he's going to once again exit that agreement, which mandates that we have a reduction in emissions, which would be beneficial to Tesla, right? So I just wanted to throw that in.
Tesla fanboy.
Elon's always been against the EV tax credit, and he's pro-Trump, so I don't see any issue happening there. And I think it's a disgusting use of the American taxpayers' dollars to fund people buying vehicles when you're $35 trillion in debt and you have all these homeless issues. Oh, yeah, and you're funding wars in Ukraine and Gaza and all that good stuff. Thanks.
Michael.
And I would agree with part of what Omar said, that there's a comparative advantage that Tesla would gain if the EV tax credit went away, because a lot of unprofitable EVs would no longer be able to be produced, and hybrids would be less desirable. However, it also means that there will be, yes, Tesla will take a larger market share, but it will mean that the market grows slower. If you want an example of this, look at what's happening to EV sales in Europe right now, especially Germany. Germany cut off their incentives late last year, I think. And also Sweden cut off their incentives, UK adjusted their incentives, and now for 3 quarters straight, EV adoption has been flat at 15% of the market. And so, yes, Tesla will comparatively do better versus other EVs, but that's not what we care about. We care about Tesla's slice of the pie of the entire automotive market.
And then Omar.
Yeah, Omar is absolutely correct. I absolutely endorse what he said. Incentives very seldom work. They very often have the most, obscene results, because it's very hard to predict what the market's going to do and how it's going to react. And moreover, it's extremely difficult to tell what's going to come out of legislation when it goes in. Look at the supercharger network they were supposed to build using all these dollars, and so far not a single charger post has been erected in 3.5 years. So the IRA, I think, was an absolute disaster. I thought it was at the time. Everybody trumpeted how much money it was going to bring Tesla. I just discounted 100%. And so I discount 100% the taking away of these incentives. Firstly, the taking away is going to be a very difficult process. Getting any legislation through is very difficult, and the results are always unforeseen in both directions. So I honestly don't put much store in making investment decisions based upon this kind of conjecture. And I think Omar's correct. I think it's going to be just another event on the road towards general EV adoption. And as to Europe, I think we are going to see a resumption of EV sales in Germany, EV growth in Germany in the coming year. And certainly it hasn't stopped growing, certainly not in the UK, and certainly not in the rest of Europe. The biggest single impediment to EV adoption right now are these crazy mongrel cars that, where they put in like a 12 kilowatt battery and they call it a hybrid. This is the biggest single problem, and at a point in time, I think all of that's going to go away. So that's how I'm thinking. I think it's a waste of time for us to even discuss this. Yeah.
Omar?
Yeah, it's really a wolf in sheep's clothing in so many ways. I mean, the government giving money for hybrids, it's been a game changer for hybrid sales. Nobody was buying hybrids before. And it's just wrong.
Yeah,
It's
but just let me just clarify one thing on that front. So I was thinking about this as I was typing up the summary 2 days ago. The credit applies only to plug-in hybrids, correct? Not
correct.
to, right. And I don't know if it's the plug-in hybrids that's causing the surge in hybrid sales.
Well, I think that plug-in hybrid sales have shot up since the EV tax credit came back to the market. You can definitely see it. And, I mean, you throw a little plug on it, it's not that hard when there's $7,500 on the line.
Yeah. So I'm sure I'm not sure if the IRA is the primary cause of hybrid sales rising. I think the more like the primary cause of it, in my opinion, and I may be wrong, and I'm open to other ideas, is humans have a tendency to pick the middle option. They don't want to go there. They don't feel they're ready all the way to go to the EVs. They pull just let go on the old gas stations and everything just yet. They're not convinced that the range is there or the battery life is there or this and that, even though we all know the facts are different. But they're kind of just tipping their toes in there, but they're not jumping in the pool just yet, is my take.
I think the single biggest contributor to hybrid sales are the bad range, the lousy range of the non-Tesla vehicles that people were buying. They've been very disappointed by them, and so they returned to hybrids. That's what I think.
Well, I mean, you saw people choosing EVs pretty overwhelmingly before this passed. As soon as it passed, and you go into a dealership and they tell you, hey, we got $7,500 off point of sale on this plug-in hybrid. You don't care. You just look at the price. That's it. So there's no doubt a $7,500 credit for hybrids that didn't exist before has been a huge boost to hybrid sales. But the broader point I was trying to make is just that subsidies of $7,500 where the government's buying everyone a car when they have a $1.21 trillion deficit, that means the tax revenue they're bringing in, the trillions of dollars they're bringing in, they're $1.21 trillion short. So this then becomes a political issue. It becomes anti-EV sentiment. It becomes, this is just the government sort of tipping the scale here, not consumers choosing. And it's a little bit antiquated, frankly. When this $7,500 tax credit was proposed in the Obama administration, EVs were more than $10,000 more than a gas car. Today, they've actually gotten to price parity. A Tesla Model 3 is cheaper than a comparable BMW or even comparable to a Toyota Corolla. You look at battery costs in China of $45 a kilowatt hour. This is not the same situation where EVs need to be subsidized to be competitive. Now they are competitive, right? You look at things like autonomy. I mean, this is just not really going to be necessary going forward. I think the battery cost declines themselves are huge. And when you really look at the government angle of this, the subsidies, you don't want the government choosing who wins and who loses in the car market. them getting involved has just been a huge disaster. And being able to just put Chinese batteries in the cars without worrying about losing the credit or anything like that is actually going to drive more rapid cost declines.
Thank you. Okay, we have quite a few hands up on the board. YouTube live chat is pretty active as well. Let's go through them real quick. Let's go to Christopher first. Christopher?
Yeah, I agree with everything Omar just said. I want to add a different angle to this, though, and that's for state, local, and government fleets in California and commercial fleets. So in California, there is a mandate where you have to purchase a certain percentage of electric vehicles to comply with the state regulation every 3 years. And I think Trump could stop that from going through. So right now, the mandate's not being enforced because the EPA hasn't given California a waiver that they need. Trump could stop that. And even if it is issued, he could challenge it in court. And if the law's put on a stay, then the regulation wouldn't be able to be implemented. Now, that said, I don't think it would affect Tesla in huge fashion because we're talking about the Tesla Semi, which right now, as Omar said many times before, like that battery material is better off being sold in vehicles versus the Semi. But the Cybertruck actually does qualify for this regulation. It's called the Advanced Clean Fleets Rule. And for the lower group, Group 1, commercial fleets could purchase the Cybertruck to comply with the California's rule, and that could possibly impact Tesla. And not only does it affect California, it affects the rest of the countries, the rest of the states, because it applies to commercial vehicles entering California, not just those that reside in there.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I just wanted to react to what Omar was saying about it's the government, tipping the scales unfairly. So Elon Musk actually supports a carbon tax, which you could also make the same argument that it tips the scales unfairly against technologies that are more carbon intensive. But really, why he supports it, and economists generally agree with him, and I agree with him, is that it's a good way to internalize into the free market externalities. However, the externality of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. However, that also means you also have to consider the political considerations. And carbon taxes are very, very difficult to pass because it unites all the industries that are carbon intensive together against them, and they're very easy to lobby against, especially the way our political funding system is set up. So carbon tax is basically a non-starter. We've tried it before in different ways to get it passed in the US. It hasn't been successful. And so what they did instead is they're starting to offer incentives for technologies that reduce emissions. And this is effectively the same thing. It's the second best option. It's internalizing the externality of emissions into the free market. So that's my point.
Okay, Omar?
Yeah, I think with the carbon tax, it's a good example of a Pigouvian tax where you tax something that you don't want people to do. So emissions are bad. They have unwanted externalities on other participants in the market. So you tax it. That I think makes a lot of sense, regardless of how hard it's going to be to pass it. Now, the government buying everyone new cars and new cars that pollute. Hey, oh, you want to buy a new car? Sure. Let me throw $7,500 on it. It's absurd, especially as EVs now start to get cheaper than gas cars. It is obviously not sustainable. I think everybody knew this right away. When you have a multi-trillion-dollar deficit and you're buying everyone new cars, hey, you want a new car? Sure, Biden will buy you one. It's just not really a sustainable situation, and it's not really good for the industry, right? Think about it like you have a son and you say, I'm going to pay him $150,000 a year so that he's safe, he's comfortable, he'll be successful. But he just sits around, he becomes a lazy lazy person, doesn't do anything, and he's ultimately not so not so well off, right? Compared to if you tell him, hey, go get a job and figure things out for yourself, it may be a little tough at first, right? He may have a big sort of decline in his quality of living. Tesla may see a little bit of a pull forward and then sales decline a little bit in one quarter, but ultimately they'll be much stronger letting economics rather than government drive the cost declines.
Leandro.
Yes, the point that I want to make is that the OEMs have been already like complacent to do anything about EVs. They have shown that they are unable to do it, and this is just gonna increase the the advantage or the head start that Tesla has. But moreover, the main reason that I'm personally invested in Tesla is not really in how many cars they sell today or how many cars they're gonna sell next year. It's mainly FSD, and FSD is to me the thing that will really differentiate Tesla from anybody else, and AI, not really the number of cars. So I think it's gonna be positive no matter what, because this is just gonna increase the separation of basically the amount of money that Tesla can make versus the amount of money that OEMs are already losing. So I think it's gonna be positive regardless, and it's just gonna make
Okay,
the
thank you.
OEM life even worse.
Vector Energy.
Yeah, back to the IRA. I don't think, because I'm a solar business owner, I think it's actually hurt our business, especially small businesses, because now people don't have money. And before we had that, we had the ITC, which was actually going down 3% a year, I believe. And it was working just fine. People knew that it was going to go away. And it kind of was an incentive for them to get in and buy it because it is going away. But yeah, people don't have money now.
Man, there's some really angry people in YouTube live chat right now. They believe, let me just kind of summarize what they're saying. They believe that EV credits going away will impact Tesla and Tesla stock. Although I think even they would agree that EV credits going away improves Tesla's competitive position among EV producers in the longer term. And I think maybe Omar, and I'll give a chance for him to speak here for a second. Even Omar, would you agree that in the shorter term, it's probably not great even for Tesla?
No, I think it's going to be great for Tesla. I would just point people to 2019 for a look at what's going to happen, because we've seen the EV tax credit expire before. So we don't really have to speculate about what's going to happen. We know, right? And when the EV tax credit expired in Q4 of 2018, or sorry, Q1 2019 was the first quarter where it started phasing out, many people predicted that Tesla sales would implode. And you did see a little bit of a pull forward in Q4. You saw a big drop in Q1. I think went down from like 90,000 to 60,000 units. So there was a big market correction, right? So we could have a quarter, let's say the quarter after it expires, where you do see a headwind to sales. But long term, of course, the company continued to grow. I mean, think about the EV tax credit like a job where you have a really bad boss. So it's a good paying job, you're getting some good money, but the boss is just a complete asshole, right? He goes, gives you all these restrictions when you can show up, like I'm talking about the battery sourcing provisions, where you can get them from, the income limits, all this stuff they have to do to comply, which is bringing up the cost and complexity of selling an EV. Although it may hurt to get fired from that job, you're going to say, you know what? Thank God I don't have to deal with that asshole boss anymore.
All
And
right.
eventually you'll recover and things will be better.
Amy.
Yeah, one thing we're forgetting in this discussion is that Trump is going to continue these record subsidies of the oil industry. It's probably going to get even worse, which is putting a really heavy hand on the scale. And it's going to delay the transition to EVs. So I think it's a terrible thing to happen.
Jimmy?
Yeah, I was going to say I kind of disagree with that last statement. Here's the thing, hybrid vehicles are no different from ICE cars. You're just adding electricity to it and a battery and more problems. There's service centers in my area at Ford who cannot touch hybrids because they don't understand the electrical system of it. The other thing is, it's all BS if we start going down this path of green, eco-friendly stuff when we're talking about hybrids. The reason they still need oil, they're the same thing as an ICE car. But the biggest thing is they're not made to last like a Tesla. Like Teslas are made to last. They will be a car that you can use for 10, 15, 20 years with minimum maintenance, no fluids, no harsh chemicals, anything like that. And so I think the hybrid, this is basically the iPhone effect that is happening, where the number one selling iPhone is always the cheapest iPhone. And when you have these government subsidies in place, people are like, oh, I'll just get that one because it's cheaper because the government's going to pay the money for it. But later on, they're going to end up spending more money anyways. So it's just a thing. I don't think Tesla needs it. I don't think the industry needs it. And I think we need to have our government stop writing and printing money.
Vector Energy.
Yeah, so first off, I bought my Tesla right after the tax credit fell off because I had money and I wanted one. But second, I think the oil industry, when that's doing great, everything's doing great. Every business, every person's making money because things cost less. So, yeah.
Uzi.
This goes back to what you were arguing with Homar's blog like 5-10 minutes ago with EVs, with hybrids. And I think it's not just about going to the mean, it's about miles per gallon being about like 10, 15 miles more, about like 40. And so I think you're right that people might want to pat themselves in the back, but it's really an affordability question. And that goes into the gallons. But I do think just with oil in general, our society has politicized supply, something that's part of the infrastructure supply. And so, yeah, oil does pollute the environment, but on the other hand, it is what drives many parts of the economy. So reconciling that perfectly is going to be a challenge, and I think batteries might be the solution. But there's no better player in that than Tesla.
Christopher?
Yeah, I mean, as far as emissions are concerned, I am a little bummed that, the Trump administration would likely stop California's law, because we're talking about drayage operations at rail yards, seaports, cross-border operations that are spewing tons of diesel particulate matter. Now, imagine if all those were Tesla semis and those communities around those areas were no longer exposed to DPM, which is a huge carcinogen. I think that's an issue.
Michael Denomar.
Yeah, I just wanted to react to the thought about deficit spending and debts, which indeed we do need to get the deficit spending under control, and perhaps raise taxes, but that's a political matter. And also, what economists believe is that many economists will argue that deficit spending is okay so long as it stimulates economic growth in excess of debt growth. So if you're stimulating economic growth in new industries, then incentives can actually be very successful. And actually, that's what happened in the solar industry. The solar industry was getting incentives for many, many years, and essentially what that allowed them to do was the market caught fire and caught on much quicker, and the result was cost innovations. And the price of solar came down, and there was a learning curve. And same thing is now happening with batteries. Same thing happened with EVs, because all of these technologies have a learning curve. And to accelerate that learning curve, you have to accelerate the market. And that's why we have incentives across the world for EVs. It's not just the US where, admittedly our politics are pretty wild. But I do agree that there are some weird provisions in the IRA that make it quite problematic. I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We could eliminate the plug-in hybrid incentive, for example. And to the person who was saying, you know, I care less about Tesla Automotive and Energy and more about FSD. Well, FSD and Robotaxi needs massive compute investments, which will be funded by Tesla Auto and Energy. So just for context, the Tesla's going to spend $3 billion this year on AI investments, and next year probably around $7 billion. And eventually, if you believe Elon Musk that he wants 5 gigawatts of training compute, that's going to be tens of billions of dollars of investment, tens of billions of dollars. Okay, because the rule of thumb in the compute world for cost is $20,000 per kilowatt of compute, all in cost. So just a thought.
Omar.
Yeah, I think this is a contentious issue just because it's become politicized. So either you like Trump or you hate Trump. And if you like Trump, you're like, yeah, this is going to be great. If you hate Trump, you're like, no, this is going to be terrible. The reality is, it doesn't matter what the government does. EVs are going to dominate regardless. It's like if the iPod came out and people were saying, oh my God, Bush doesn't like the iPod. Obama likes the iPod. Oh, Obama's going to buy everyone an iPod. It doesn't matter if he buys everyone an iPod or an iPhone. They'll end up buying one themselves because there's enormous amount of value, right? If the government's buying it for everyone, it might sort of help accelerate it. But either way, it's inevitable. And our founding fathers, they designed a very good government that served us very well for hundreds of years. One person can't just unilaterally do something. They have to go through Congress. There's going to be tons of opportunity to fight along the way and try and set a sensible policy. And worst case scenario, they set a horrible policy. Guess what? We got an opportunity to vote the guy out in 4 years and institute the exact opposite policy. So it's not really going to matter. Now, let's look at the most optimistic scenario possible for a repeal of the EV tax credit. Trump wins the White House, which, by the way, is not as much of a sure thing as people want. We don't even know who the Democratic nominee may be yet. Definitely does seem like Trump is winning now. So Trump has to win. He has to win the House. He has to win the Senate. I mean, the Republicans have to win. Then they have to actually pass legislation that bans the EV tax credit. Let's say they are able to do that in his first 100 days. The legislation would likely, at the earliest, repeal it starting in the 2026 tax year. Now, if you look at the survey from the other day about when robo-taxis are going to start operation, a lot of people are saying 2025, 2026. So we're really arguing about this tax credit for people who buy EVs when the reality is by the time people actually get the tax credit repealed, we'll be moving into a world where people don't even own cars. So in many ways, it's really the wrong question. The government will do what they do, but this is really a technology story here. Look at the trend of battery cost declines. Look at the trend of miles per intervention. Those things are going to determine the future, not government policy.
Me.
Yeah, I wanted to say that $25,000 Tesla EV actually sounds pretty good right about now. If they get rid of this tax credit, it still puts them well in a better position than any other car manufacturer out there. I hope that they can get to it and they can actually make it, because I think that would change everything. And I think adoption would be like so massive. I just don't think the infrastructure in America can support it. I have a lot of sources who are
You can't.
working with
I mean,
these
you can get a used Model 3, couple of years old used Model 3 for less than $20,000 today.
Imagine the advertisement though. Brand new car, 26,000 EV.
It's not that different from what we have today.
Oh, I just think it will be. I think it will change.
Okay. Christopher and then Omar.
Yeah, I agree with everything Omar just said, with the caveat that there is no price parity in the commercial sector, at least. So a new diesel semi truck's about 120 grand versus a comparable Class 8 semi truck, which is 460 to 520 grand. So a big difference there. And then you also have to consider the demand or subscription charges of the large chargers that are required for these type of vehicles. So yeah, I see an issue for the commercial sector, which I do think will impact Tesla stock, maybe in a limited fashion.
Omar.
Yeah, I think really when you look at the Trump administration regulations, you really want to look at what is the net impact of regulation, right? So let's say there's some regulations that hurt, some regulations that help. What does it come out to at net? The Trump administration is generally pretty relaxed on business regulation. They generally try to enact business friendly policies. They've proposed, for example, cutting the corporate tax rate, I think, by 5 or 6%. So, what's the value of 5 or 6% of earnings globally compared to the value of people who live in the United States who have an income that's low enough that qualify for the EV tax credit? I think that on a net, it could be pretty positive. I think that first of all, removing the subsidy for hybrids would be very positive for Tesla. And I think that when you look at other things, for example, regulation on autonomy, regulation on taxes, there's a strong case to make that it could be a net positive, not to mention the fact that President Biden hates Elon.
Victor.
Yeah, Omar, do you think taking out the IRA could affect Tesla and that they do leasing, and whenever they lease a vehicle, they claim the tax incentive themselves?
Leasing's a very small part of their business. And the IRA being repealed is not a done deal yet. It To repeal legislation, I mean, just to give you an example, Trump's first campaign, he said, "We're going to repeal Obamacare. We're going to repeal Obamacare." He went in there, he tried to repeal Obamacare. They couldn't repeal it. I think they repealed some provisions. I think they repealed the mandate, for example, but most of that legislation still stands today. So I kind of see a similar thing with the IRA. I think possibly the credit may be on the chopping block, but other things like, for example, subsidies of American battery manufacturing, I could see that staying, and I could see the Trump administration actually supporting that as American manufacturing is a big part of their sort of policy platform.
Amy.
I just don't see Trump. He's going to try to kill the industry, and this is going to be his opportunity if he gets elected. There's, I mean, EVs they make up less than 10% of the car market. People and the sales are slowing. This is just not a good thing to have him in power.
Wow, this topic has so many vectors. It is crazy, from politics to credits to stock and competitive positioning. This is a hell of a topic that we can go on for days and days and days. Let's go to Omar.
Yeah, I just think, and I'm not a huge Trump fan. I sympathize with Amy's position, but I do think politics can kind of cloud things sometimes. You think, okay, I don't like Trump. If you just look at Trump's first term from 2016 to 2020, he didn't do anything to kill the EV industry. I mean, he was for coal, he was for fossil fuels, he was against EVs, but EVs grew immensely. I mean, we saw the ramp up of the Model 3 and the introduction of the Model Y during this time. So far from EVs being hurt, they really flourished. And I think that although the administration is taking a strong political stance on EVs, I think this is a very sort of calculated political move they're doing. A lot of these swing states that are going to decide the election are auto working states, and they're really capitalizing on that anxiety. It's really great politics, honestly, to sort of make those workers be afraid that Chinese EVs are coming to take their job. But I think at the same time that they're sort of against subsidies and mandates, They also appreciate American manufacturing. They appreciate what Elon is doing. Certainly, he has their ear. Certainly, he's very influential. And my gut tells me that they would probably want to see Tesla continue to thrive, as it is a very important American company.
Michael.
I would just add the context that Rohan Patel, who used to be the head of Tesla's business policy in Washington, D.C., he would go there often and work with administrations. And he at one point reported directly to Elon, so this very senior guy. And he was working on getting lots of incentives for gigafactories around the world. And so he said, quote, "The Trump administration was actively hostile to us being Tesla, in many respects, especially at the EPA." So when you say, Trump didn't kill EVs when he was in office, EVs flourished despite Trump. He didn't help them at all. He didn't help Tesla at all. And while I agree the Biden administration has been unnecessarily hostile to Elon Musk and very annoying, and they should reconsider their position, I think it's going to be very hard now that Elon, through his support behind Trump, given that Biden might not even be the nominee, it could be Kamala Harris or someone else, and then they might be a stronger candidate than Biden and actually turn the current trend around and beat Trump. And then what? Then how is the new administration going to treat someone who endorsed Trump? That's why getting into politics is a dangerous game. I'm not happy that Elon did it. It's fine. He has a right to his opinions, but politics is a dangerous game.
Well, I definitely wouldn't credit.
Fine, he has a right to his opinions, but politics is a dangerous game.
Well, I definitely wouldn't credit Trump with making Trump isn't exactly breaking news. I think really what matters is the Biden administration, they want to charge Musk criminally. They're investing his companies. They want to charge him with fraud for making Autopilot and FSD, the software we all use. So it's two bad choices. I mean, I think Elon tweeted the same thing earlier this morning. It's two bad choices, but he's taking a gamble. He's going with the guy who doesn't hate his guts. He's had a read on both of them, and he thinks this is the best choice. As controversial as it is, he's been willing to go out and risk the anger of so many longtime supporters to get this done. And, this is kind of what Musk does. He takes these crazy calculated risks. And a lot of times things don't work out. But if things do work out here, I think they're going to be in a position where they enjoy probably a more favorable treatment by the government, and that they're able to have influence to not only not get charged with fraud for Autopilot and FSD, but actually push for nationwide robotaxi legislation that could be incredibly important and incredibly meaningful over the next 4 years. Not to mention everything SpaceX wants as a federal contractor.
Jimmy, Vector, Bradford, Michael.
All right, I'm just going to throw this in here. This is political advice for everybody in the room. Just always vote for the opposite of what you want. So if Trump hates EVs, vote for the Democrats, because the opposite happens. The Democrats, let's get rid of guns. More guns sold under Democratic power. Republicans get in, we love guns. They ban a bunch of stuff. That's just how it works in politics. We see this all the time. So if Trump's going to ban EVs, expect large growth in EVs. If Democrats are like, we love EVs, expect the demand to go down. That's just how I live my life.
That's how Americans are, We don't like being told what to do. Hey, buy an EV. I don't need the government to tell me to buy one of these damn electric vehicles. Okay, well, you can't buy an electric vehicle. I don't need you to tell me what to do. I'm gonna go get one now.
All right, 15 more minutes on this topic, and then we're going to switch topics. We have a lot. First half hour was about CrowdStrike. The next hour was about Trump's speech and the impact on EV industry. And then last half hour, we're going to talk about the recent deals, price changes on Teslas, as well as there's some news around robotaxis in China. Let's go to Vector, Michael, then Bradford.
Yeah, I think this is totally a monetary decision, especially like with Elon backing Trump. I think when the country has no money, nobody can buy anything, literally. We did fine with Trump. I had the ITC, which is the original solar tax incentive. It was doing its job just fine. Trump actually extended it a year before it started falling off. Yeah.
Michael, then Bradford.
Just a quick reaction to that first is the Wall Street Journal put out a survey of economists. And the Wall Street Journal is not a left-wing publication. And the survey of economists found that the vast majority, or not the vast majority, I'm sorry, it was like 40 or 50 something percent, the plurality believed Trump's policies, especially his policies on immigration, his policies on tariffs would be actually inflationary, as well as cutting taxes. And only 12, 13, 14, I don't remember exact number, percent believed that Biden's policies would be more inflationary. And the rest said basically there would be no difference. So the economic consensus is that Trump's policies would actually be more inflationary. And that brings me to my next point is, and this is my political advice, in general, stock markets and businesses and the markets all do the best when there's divided government, when there's one party in the presidency and maybe another party in Congress. And that's because the divided party forces compromise, forces things, it ejects extreme ideas and forces things to come to the table and work together to work on policy. And that will be helpful if, for example, Trump wants to repeal the IRA and he's elected president. If there's a Democratic Congress, then he won't be able to do it. So just an example and a thought.
What do you think about all this?
I don't think we heard the name who you were calling on.
Bradford?
Yeah, I think people they're hearing about the repeal of the IRA and they're thinking that it's bad for Tesla. I think this space has done a great job of highlighting that. I think right now it's actually neutral for Tesla. If they got really good at making 4680 batteries, it would be bad that the IRA got repealed. But right now, as Omar likely highlighted much earlier, there's a ton of confusion among consumers that hybrids are the same as full battery electric vehicles, and hybrids are getting the same benefit that Teslas with eight times the amount of batteries get. Essentially, the vehicle portion of the IRA is a giveaway to hybrids, and hybrids are the way for legacy auto to try to continue to milk the system until the eventual transition to nearly all vehicles being full BEV. So I don't think an appeal would be bad for Tesla. Certainly, it would change a bit of the economics between battery electric vehicles and ICE. But I would say a lot of buyers don't even qualify for the tax credit. They might get some on the financing or doing leases or doing through used cars, but I don't see the harm to Tesla. Now, if Tesla really gets rocking and rolling with batteries, certainly, missing out on all the $45 per kilowatt hour will hurt. But right now, with the chasm that we're in between the early adopters and the early majority, we're in that chasm now. I thought we were out of it. We're in that chasm where there's this confusion and this big drop off, and hybrids need a kick in the nuts. And I would actually be happy if the IRA was repealed. But I think a lot of people don't understand that give and take.
Amy?
I just want to say that Elon kind of backed off on his support, financial support. He's saying last night he tweeted out that he's got his own super PAC, so he's not giving directly to this Trump super PAC. So I thought that was interesting.
Vector, then Omar.
Yeah, I remember when people said that Trump's solar tariffs from imported solar was going to destroy the solar industry, and it actually did the opposite. They made American solar cost comparable to the imported, and so everyone started buying American, like Mission Solar made in Texas, for example. That's what we use.
Omar.
Yeah, I mean, when you really look at the impact of the EV tax credit, you have to look at the comparative cost, right? So with the old EV tax credit structure, an EV had this big expensive battery. Let's call it a $10,000 battery. Now you had this $7,500 tax credit that could take that extra, let's call it $7,500 just to make it simple. That could take that extra $7,500 battery cost and zero it out. So now it's comparable to a gas car, right? There's a $7,500 difference. And so the price of the EV is actually the same as the gas car. Now, when you actually add hybrids in there, it's a very subtle change. It's very pernicious. Most people probably didn't even notice. But now gas cars, which don't have the $7,500 cost, are able to get the $7,500 benefit. So rather than now EVs having a comparative benefit, gas cars now have the comparative benefit. These incentives are very powerful. So in addition to actually gas cars getting the comparative benefit, because they're now able to offer a lower price than the EV, you also have all these costs of complying with the IRA. You have to fight to the death to keep qualifying every year because you need to make sure that everything comes from supported countries, which is very easy if you have like a 5 kilowatt hour battery, right? Okay, yeah, just get some materials from whatever country, sure. But when you have a 80 kilowatt hour battery that's powering the whole car, that cost is just times, uh, several times more. So something that was actually giving a comparative benefit to EVs is now actually giving a comparative benefit to gas cars. And that's why I have always said that it's harmful in ways that people don't really realize.
Bradford, then Luce. Bradford. Okay, Luce.
Hello, everybody. So I wanted to ask if the incentives could be replaced with an American-made incentive or something more in line with the Trump administration. Yeah.
I didn't hear the question. Omar, did you hear the question?
No, I heard Trump administration.
Luce, can you be clear?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, ask your question again.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask if the incentives could be replaced with an American-made incentive or something similar, more in line with the Trump administration.
Yeah, that's a good question. So Trump also mentioned yesterday's speech that he might put like 200% tariffs on cars produced in Mexico. Like if the Chinese automakers like BYD build a factory in Mexico with the intention of exporting them to the US, he would put a 200% tariff. but he welcomes these automakers to build factories in the US. So Lucha is asking Omar, if if the EV credit goes away, could it be replaced with maybe American-made EVs or American-made cars getting some sort of an incentive? What do you think? Omar?
So, sorry, what did you say?
Lucha is asking if the EV credit goes away, could it be replaced? Could Trump replace it with an American-made car, incentives for American-made cars?
I don't know. I don't think the government should be buying people cars. I think people should buy their own cars. When the government gets involved, it rarely helps, right? I mean, they came in, they said, okay, we're giving 7,500, but okay, well, now you have to keep your EV under this price. Okay, well, now that you're capping my profits. Okay, well, now only, people with certain income, and you need to get the battery metals from here. They're literally regulating what metals we can put in our batteries and where we can get them from. This is slowing the EV transition down. So please just get the government far, far away from us so that they can just leave us alone.
Bradford, then Michael.
I don't know if you all talked about all the misinformation that Trump says about EVs. He's constantly talking about Chinese-made EVs, where Chinese-made EVs are not sold in the U.S. Of the top 10 EVs, 8 of the 10 are assembled in America, and 8 of the 10, the majority, the largest part supplier is the United States. Trump also says that you have to stop to charge if you go from Jersey to DC. This is something that's trivial. So it's trivial without a stop. I'm not looking forward to like more of this misinformation. But we're getting it with Biden anyways. So that was I'm done there. We didn't hear you, Yaman.
Michael.
Oh yeah, sir. So I agree with Bradford, and I would build off what Bradford said, that we are currently in a chasm between early adopters and the early majority for EVs, and it's also happening kind of in Europe as well. And what I mentioned before in Europe is that for 3 quarters straight, the market share of EVs has been 15%, flat at 15%. And that's because some of the incentives have been taken off the table. And so what is usually required for these industries to cross the chasm is time. And if you want to save time and cross the chasm faster, we need to continue to incentivize EVs, and then B, to dispel misinformation around charging, around range, around cost of EVs. A lot of people just don't know that EVs are cheaper. And even like just on the base price, sticker price. So I completely agree with Bradford, and to Luce, who asked about the American-made incentive. That was kind of the idea behind the IRA. It had a lot of provisions about things being made in America and from America. And unfortunately, like Omar pointed out, a lot of these requirements made things unnecessarily complicated.
Jimmy.
So you have 2 old guys. One guy is going to put $1.7 billion into the legacy auto industry. That's your tax money to try to get Michigan plants up and running and building cars. How long will that last? I have no idea. $46 million of that is going to Korea manufacturer, which is not a US manufacturer. And then you have another guy who's going to say, we will put a 200% tariff on any car that is not made in America. So it's really up for you to decide where you want your money to go. you're going to get an increase in productivity and better product if it's made in America versus in Mexico. But I'm very confused by Trump saying that China can come to America and they can make auto here in our country. Is there going to be a tariff there, or is there not going to be a tariff? If anyone knows, I'd love to hear.
Bradford.
I don't know the answer to that, but where my mind goes as an analyst from here is the $7,500 goes away for EVs and hybrids. And what's a Tesla product like compared to other cars out there? You have the Model 3 Performance that's been lauded by this James C guy who's like a super car nut. Like he's really into like driving the cars manually. He did the Cybertruck review. I'm spacing on his last name, but he basically said besides this obscure to me car that's like super fun to drive shift, the Model 3 Performance is the best driving car out there. So then you look at the Model 3 compared to the BMW 3 Series, the Mercedes C, the Audi A4 or whatnot. And it's just a better product, and people need to figure that out over time. I think that's kind of where things will be headed from here. And how quickly are people able to figure that out? One thing that's funny about charging is there's some people we join at the community pool, and they asked my wife about charging. They said, how far does it go on a charge? And my wife said, well, how often do you go on a long trip where you're driving? And the person who asked the question started laughing because they realized they don't. Like they literally don't go on a long trip. And they realize that like the whole thing about range doesn't even apply to them. And I think people will figure this out over time. How quickly can be subject to different factors, but I think that's kind of where my mind goes back to as far as like how EVs will grow. But luckily, we have other things going on at Tesla besides vehicles.
Thank you, Brian.
I think the lens to look at this discussion through is that it's what we're having is an economic war with China with EVs. I mean, the Chinese government has direct purchase subsidies. They have manufacturing subsidies. They have battery subsidies. They have license plate policies that help incentivize EVs. They subsidize charging infrastructure. They have other regulatory support. And I don't look so much at the domestic politics, but more at the international economics. And maybe the question we should be answering is how we combat all of that money from China, who wants to take as much of the global auto industry as they can.
Okay, thank you. I pinned at the top of our screens the question that we've been debating over the last hour. We had 24 people express their opinions on the speaker board, but we have thousands of people who didn't get a chance to because they're in the listener mode. You may reply to the tweet at the top. And if you learned anything from this discussion in the last hour, please mention the speaker from whom you learned something new and material and thank them. And this is your way of thanking the speakers who volunteer their times. No speaker here gets paid. Nobody here gets paid. They volunteer their times, they volunteer their insights. And so I really appreciate all of you for that. Thank you very much, everybody. All right. Omar, let's change topics. Tesla introduced the Model Y 1.99% low APR financing in the first month of Q3 as opposed to mid second quarter. And yesterday we had news that in California, Tesla sales went down for 3 quarters in a row, down 20% in Q2 from Q2 of last year, as opposed to the overall market being about flat. Does this concern you as an investor, that Tesla is having to offer these low rates extended to Model Y? These are great deals, unbelievably great deals, but does it concern you as an investor?
I'm not concerned. Obviously, it is a little bit of a headwind, but this really goes back to the previous discussion. It is a deal with the devil in so many ways. And what we've really seen in the US market, which I don't think a lot of people understand, is because of these EV mandates, because of them saying, okay, we're going to raise the fuel economy standards. Oh, we're going to give $7,500 for an EV. Every legacy auto market rushed to the market with a crappy EV compliance car. And as they brought them to market, nobody wanted to buy them. And as nobody wanted to buy them, and they began piling up on dealer lots at double, triple the levels of their ICE cars, right? ICE cars would have a 50-day supply. EVs would have a 100 or 150-day supply because no one wanted them. They can't do fast charging. They can't do long distance travel. They're not a Tesla. So what you've started to see happen now in the market, especially in California, where a lot of the EV market's concentrated and a lot of these legacy automakers focused and dumped their products, you've seen massive increases in incentives and discounts to move these EVs. And Tesla is actually not giving that many incentives compared to the other EVs. Now, we've seen the other automakers, the other OEMs start to pull back their production. So I don't think this is sort of a sustained situation. I think they're trying to kind of get rid of inventory. But I think I commented here with my thread that I wrote yesterday on this topic of the sales decline. And, let me give you some figures. In May, many EV models had over $15,000 in discounts. $15,000. The Kia EV6 had $16,812 in incentives. Kia EV9 incentives reached $18,078. And GM's Cadillac Lyric had incentives of $17,732. For comparison, the Model Y had an average incentive in May of $5,570, while Rivian was offering about $4,060. So you're looking at these legacy automakers offering incentives that are several times what Tesla's offering. And Tesla's actually outselling them despite offering a lot less incentives. But when you are a shopper, you're a Toyota buyer, for example, and you go to shop for an EV, you say, okay, I want an EV. When Toyota's offering a much better deal because they're just giving a, $15,000 discount, a lot of people are going to go buy that and just go for the lower monthly payment. So scroll down to the bottom of the thread here and you can see the BZ4X. So the BZ4X is around the same price as a Model Y. Both are around $45,000. I think the BZ4X starts at around $43,000, but with a standard configuration you'll find in the dealer, it's about the same as a Model Y. Now, the lease price that Toyota's offering here, get $239 a month for a 36-month lease on a BZ4X. $29.99 down, 10,000 miles, but this includes $15,250 of cash incentives. So the result is that the lease price on the BZ4X is half of the $500 lease price Tesla's offering on the same terms, $2,000 down. Now, if you're a Toyota fan, why would you pay twice as much to lease a Model Y when you could lease two Toyota EVs? Well, of course, it's a terrible decision. There's a reason it's priced that way. Nobody wants these cars. They're terrible. The wheels sometimes fall off of these things. But if you're a Toyota fan, you haven't done your research, you probably think, Toyota's great. Let me go ahead and lease that. So these EV mandates and incentives have created really this situation in the market where there's a liquidation of these EVs. There's huge incentives being offered. And, Tesla has to obviously offer incentives too to compete. I mean, you look at Fisker, for example. they're selling their EVs at, this was a $60,000 car. They're selling them for $15,000 to $25,000 now that the company's gone bankrupt. This isn't really a sustained competitive situation that Tesla has to face. It's sort of a temporary liquidation. Just as you saw all those production announcements where everyone said, oh, we're going to produce all these EVs, you saw them come to the market, you saw them fail. This has created a glut of EV supply and depressed the market, including Tesla. Now, looking forward, they're saying, hey, we're going to start ramping production down. So they're not going to be able to continue having these EVs and discounting them $15,000. They're ramping down production. So as we get into a more normal situation in the market, as we unwind from the pandemic, as you stop seeing these huge $15,000 incentives, I mean, half the cost of the car practically on a car they're already losing money on, I think it'll become clear how strong of a position Tesla's really in competitively, because they're the only ones making money on these things. And I think they'll be left standing as Fisker disappears and GM shuts down these EVs and everybody else kind of folds their hand early. And I don't think that's really appreciated. Everyone just wants to say, oh, okay, this is because Tesla's terrible. But really, the reason Tesla sales are down is because the other EVs are so bad, if that makes any sense.
Machine.
Oh my God, this guy talked for like 10 minutes straight, literally. You're wasting your entire space. And he's wrong. He's so wrong. The Toyota BZ4X piece of crap is the reason that Tesla sales are down in California. I have never even seen a Toyota BZ4X, and I see EVs all over the place all the time. And, these other cars, like, they're just not really selling that many of them, okay? Like, yeah, their production is going to even ramp even further down, but there's not many. And that's not the reason that EV demand has softened in California relative to other places. EV demand overall, we know, is down slightly. If as supply goes up, because of recession or pre-recession, tech stocks going down. This is especially sensitive in California, where people make a lot of their money on stocks and investing, and then go YOLO, buy a Tesla, make a porn account with their Tesla driving on the road, doing all this crazy stuff. That's California way, okay? And it's down because of that. And the other reason, as I've mentioned many times, and Omar wants to ignore because he lives in liberal land, California, SF, where there's homeless on the street everywhere. He's very proud of himself that he has cheap electricity, that the rest of us in the suburbs, the safe suburbs, no poop on the street. But we
Okay, dude, just get to your point.
45 cents per kilowatt hour. That's gone up.
No way. People are not paying 45 cents.
No, absolutely. Go look up PG&E rates that have gone up.
Dude,
And
you're getting ripped off. That's not what's normal for people.
Yes,
We're
it is.
paying
You're
24
wrong.
cents here in LA. I mean, you
stop.
keep banging on this point, but look,
Oh my God.
let me just respond to what you're saying. So, the cost of electricity wouldn't explain why Tesla's share of the EV market has declined, right? And this isn't my analysis. This is an analysis from S&P Global Mobility. I'm just telling you what they said, right? So you go look at the sales, and I have seen these BZ4Xs, but it's not just BZ4X. It's every brand. EV sales boosts, and EV sales are up, but it's really driven by the liquidation of these models. They're offering record incentives. And just to give you guys some context, I mentioned how there's a $17,000 incentive. A year ago, that same incentive on the Cadillac Lyriq was $761. So it's gone from less than 1,000 to 17,000. This is absolutely impacting the market. It's not a permanent situation, but every analyst who's looking at the registration data is saying the reason that these EVs are gaining share is because they're offering massive sales incentives.
Can I finish my point now after being rudely interrupted?
You have like 5 minutes you talk, and that 4 minutes of it is nonsense.
For so long, the electricity rates have literally doubled over 4 years. And many people are keenly aware that they used to be able to get a deal on recharging their car versus gas costs here, because obviously gas costs are also high. And those people don't see that incentive as much. And certainly, one aspect of that is that they're not as likely to buy EVs. And to Omar's point, these other
But then
manufacturers,
why are EV sales up?
listen, these other manufacturers, in order to move steel, have to make massive discounts to adjust to that fact that there's softening demand overall. I don't understand. They're having to make massive price cuts because there's less demand. So there's less demand for EVs. How can you argue that their demand is up? Their demand is not up. They had to cut prices some insane amount, and you just went and listed all of it. So we agree, okay? But that's the effect, not the cause. Them cutting their prices so much is an effect of softening demand because of things such as insane electricity prices for the entire PG&E region, which is all of Northern California.
Okay, before we continue, I need to say something while we have everybody in here. So some people are replying every now and then that, I'm asking a lot of questions. A couple of people in YouTube live chat complain that there's ads in YouTube. I want to make it clear that this is very important that you reply to the questions, that there's engagement in these questions. Like, repost, reply to the questions. If you're bothered about ads on YouTube, sign up for YouTube Premium. If you want this space to continue, sign up for Patreon. This is the reality, okay? I spend my entire day, no joke, entire day for this space. And I understand people want free content. I enjoy being here. This space is valuable. Support it. Otherwise, it won't survive. The financials of this space is worse than Rivian, okay? We're not even contribution margin positive right now. We'll get to contribution margin positive when I have about 50,000 followers here and 10,000 followers on YouTube, 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. Gross margin positive will be about 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. Right now, we're at 2,000. All right, so we're not even close. So if you complain, I really don't appreciate that. I appreciate the people who do support the space. This is the reality. All right. And I'm not as patient as Elon is about people complaining about prices. I will block you because I don't want to hear your nonsense. All right. Omar.
Yeah, I think Machine has just made this argument over the years that electricity is too expensive, and it's just so ridiculous. We've debunked it multiple times. US EV registrations are actually up 9.6% year over year. So the idea that electricity is too expensive for people, I don't think that's the case. Obviously, there's inflation. This isn't a secret. Electricity prices have gone up, yes, but the price of everything has gone up, including fuel. Your average Californian is still saving a boatload of money switching to an EV compared to driving a gas car. And often the utilities are offering special lower rates to EV drivers to charge.
Christopher.
Yeah, I work for a utility, and there's no way Machine is paying 45 cents per kilowatt hour. That's insane. There's no way. PG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric, SoCal Edison, they're all investor-owned utilities. They're all regulated by the California Public Utility Commissions. All the rates, all the programs they have are typically in lockstep with one another because we're required to do so.
Machine.
I just think your listeners and speakers don't know math or how to read numbers. I suggest you just go look at PG&E's plans. They will tell you how much they charge you. And don't come back at me and tell me, oh, they have the EV rate plan where you can charge at night. Go look at their night charging amount rate, and then the day, which is like 50 to 60. And when you go calculate it, you still end up with a very high value. And those values, whether you want to quibble if it's 38 cents or 42 cents in aggregate, have gone up literally 100% over 4 years. That is not in line with any inflation I have ever experienced, even the 30% inflation we've had over that time period. Okay, this is the CPUSC is totally corrupt. Okay, because PG&E is a total failure and has been sued out of their mind and is now just trying to pass it back on all their residential users because they got some electricity lines in the mountains they don't know how to handle, and so now people in the suburbs got to pay for it. This is a key problem in California. It's not all of California. This is PG&E especially. So you know, you can't even compare it to SoCal Edison.
Okay. Adopt a dog, then Trevor, then Michael, then Christopher.
Hey guys, the real question for me is why is EV adoption lower in North America, United States, than Europe and Asia? It could be cost to operate. I'm just curious. I was just in beloved Austin for a few days, and it doesn't look like an EV town to me, or a Tesla town specifically. I was wondering, when are we going to win over some red states if indeed the whole political system is moving towards the red side? I'll take my answer on the air.
Trevor?
Yeah, going back to Machine's point, I totally agree. I have family in Berkeley. They're paying 40 to 45 cents a kilowatt hour. But to Omar's earlier point, that's a person who bought an Ionic 5, or rather leased it because they were giving it away with free charging at Electrify America. Also a person who wouldn't buy a Tesla because of Elon. But yeah, electricity is very expensive in parts of California. And when I run the numbers for him, I think it makes 4 times less sense for you to buy this car than it does for me.
Michael?
Yeah, so it's true that in California, the electricity rates have been increasing, and part of the reason for that is because the fires that happened, and now the utilities have to underground a lot of the power lines, and of course, there's part of it is, as usual, you know, shady dealings. Um, and part of it is legitimate, part of it is shady dealings. And the electricity rate, according to the EIA, the average electricity rate in California is 34 cents per kilowatt hour. However, in the entire United States, the electricity rate is the average electricity rate is 17 cents per kilowatt hour, and we still have kind of similar trends happening in the United States. So I think the electricity rates thing is kind of a red herring. And even still, even with like 40, 45 cent electricity rates, it's cheaper to drive EVs than gas cars. So I think the electricity rates are a red herring, as I mentioned. And in the US, unfortunately, EV sales, they're still growing. They just are not growing as fast as they used to. According in Q2, it was an 11.3% increase of EV sales versus the prior year Q2 in the United States. And Tesla, unfortunately, their sales declined 6.3% year over year in Q2 in the US. And part of the reason for that is Cybertruck isn't ramped up yet, and all the other models are kind of older and have reached their kind of mature phases. And hopefully, once the Model Y is refreshed next year, the sales will recover. And also,
Okay.
Tesla is planning vehicles for 2025 that are cheaper that will
Okay.
also help grow sales.
Omar, then Machine.
So I went ahead and looked up what the electricity rates are. It's 25 cents a kilowatt hour for Southern California Edison and 31 cents a kilowatt hour for PGE. So, you know, if you assume you have a 100 kilowatt hour battery, which, you know, most cars have smaller than that, it's $25 to $30 for a Model S or Model X, less for a Model 3 or Model Y. Now, good luck getting a gallon of tank of gas for just $20 to $30 in California. gas is $5 a gallon here. So, I mean, I just think it's a ridiculous argument. I can't believe we waste time on this so much. Machine is clearly getting ripped off. They said, "Oh my God, this guy looks so stupid. Let me just mark up his electricity, charge him 45 cents a kilowatt hour." And, then he keeps coming here to complain about it.
Machine.
I think your listeners have never heard of weighted averages in context of not only rates and also across the US and who's buying these cars. So what we have in PGE land, which I did share the data sheet, and of course you took it down just to let Omar create lies.
It's in the replies, and you're not the only
go look at
person.
the
Like there's
replies.
literally
Go
a
look at the
dozen
numbers.
a dozen people shared the same screenshot. Okay.
So you go look at the numbers, and then when you go take and aggregate how much people electricity use at those different times, you're going to get around 40 cents per kilowatt hour in PG&E land. This is the thing. We're not talking about the poors in Central Valley or the, people in the, Inland Empire down in Southern California who have some money. But PG&E, Northern California, the Bay Area, these are the richest people in California. These are the people buying the most souped up Model S's and X's, paying for all the extra stuff, the higher margin vehicles. And these people have been hit the hardest. I don't know how anyone can go here and say, oh, but look, in Kansas, the electricity rate, it didn't go up that much, so it's okay. Listen, we're not in Kansas anymore. We pay more. More people buy the cars here than they do in Kansas. The 10 people in Kansas who have a Tesla don't matter as much. This whole conversation started with
poor Mark Andreessen living in Atherton. Poor guy. He has to pay 40 cents a kilowatt hour. How does he even afford, like breakfast? I don't even know. These guys are all rich, okay? They don't care that their electricity cost went up. They don't even look at their bill. It just auto pays, okay? And it's still cheaper than gas. There's no contest about it. And of course, PG&E has a time of use rate that they offer for EV drivers. They say, look, if you want to use during peak hours during the day, yes, we're going to charge you more for that. But if you want to charge at night when we have no demand, then we're going to give you 30 cents a kilowatt hour, a much lower rate than you would get for, let's say, powering your home during peak hours.
All right. Listen, literally thousands of people not know the electricity rate in California, and it's not a good use of our time. Machine Omar says the fair value of Tesla today, with everything we talked considered, is $1 trillion today. What do you think is the fair value of Tesla today?
Well, since I think mathematically, I would say it's a good buy if it went down to 200 or lower. I would think it's a good buy. So that means I do think the fair value is higher than that. I think all in all, if you looked at the EV and energy sectors and what value they can bring, and I think actually I will give credit to Michael, even though I think his assumptions of some of his numbers were too optimistic in some conversation we had. I think he brought some insight in terms of even FSD as an L2 assist, supporting an extra. I forget if he went down to $1 to $200 billion or 100 or that much per share. I do think we're kind of near fair value right now. I think it could be a little. I think you could argue fair value is $300, or maybe 750 billion fair value right now. Obviously trying to intake some chance of robotaxi and Optimus as well. But no, I don't ascribe super high probabilities to those at this moment in the short term.
Okay. Omar, another question for you, changing topics. There was some news about robotaxis in China having the same public acceptance issues as Cruise and others in San Francisco. That there was one example of a robotaxi confusing a plastic bag and stopping in the middle of the road. There is also reports of taxi drivers opposing adoption of robotaxis in China. This is in line with, in the past, I've said there appears to be a bit of a resistance about AI from humans. Does this give you a pause about your forecast of how fast robotaxis will proliferate across the world in the coming years?
No, I mean, it's a really interesting article. I really enjoyed reading it last night. I was fascinated, right? Because we don't have a lot of opportunity to experience what's going on in China. We rely what's coming out of the country, and they don't have freedom of the press. So most of the stuff you see is just puff pieces. And then you got guys like, Gary Black who say, "Oh, look, Baidu, they've solved robotaxi already." You actually hear from these people on how it works. And it was, someone came into the space the other day and they said, "Oh, is it, all these people are losing their jobs because of robotaxi." It's just something that's just so exaggerated, the progress that these companies are making. By all accounts, Baidu is far, far behind Waymo. Now, these services today, the Baidu Apollo service, for example, it only runs in certain cities. So it only runs in Wuhan. In Wuhan, they have an autonomous testing ground. So it's basically like a fake city made for the purpose of just testing autonomous cars. And they've kind of set it up there, like certain areas of certain cities, but they can't just take you anywhere. They have certain stations that you go to. Okay. So the cars just drive between these fixed stations. And then a lot of them actually have safety drivers in them. And even still, even with all these restrictions, they're still getting stuck in the middle of the road. People are getting frustrated. One of them ran a red light and hit a person the other week, which wasn't very good, obviously. I mean, these guys are far behind Waymo, and honestly, from the sound of it, even far behind Tesla. I mean, Tesla doesn't say you can only go to certain FSD stations, they let you drive anywhere. So, I mean, I'm just so bullish on this company right now because everybody's distracted. They're distracted by politics or this, or I don't like Elon, or everybody just wants to have this negative view. But then you look at FSD, you look at what it's doing, driving me around for hours without intervention. And the fact that it works in the US, it works in China, it works in Europe, and it's this generalized system that can work anywhere. I really think it's not appreciated how huge their lead in real world AI is. A lot of people think, oh, okay, well, Baidu's way ahead of them, right? When they said, oh, we're partnering with Baidu on mapping. They said, oh, okay, great. Now they've solved autonomy. They're going to use Baidu's. Well, Baidu doesn't have anything. Even Waymo doesn't have anything compared to what Tesla has. But almost everybody believes that Tesla's actually behind instead of the leader. So I think it's going to be a really interesting next few months and years as people start to understand the nuances of the technology. That to really launch a global robotaxi service, you need a foundation model that's capable of moving around the world on its own. And these other techniques, while they yielded impressive demos, it was a lot of fake it until you make it. And they may never make it.
Thank you, Omar. Humanities?
Yeah, the incident with the lady in China, she actually ran the red light on a scooter, and the self-propelled autonomous vehicle ran into her. So let's just wanted to clarify that.
All right, thank you. Omar, would you like to close us off?
I think the only problem you're going to have with Tesla is that you didn't buy more, not financial advice.
Thank you very much, everybody. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate it when people share this space with their followers. And I'm going to post a link to YouTube as well. Again, like I said, the financials of the space is worse than Rivian. We're not even contribution margin positive. And most of the cost is just my time. You know, I spend the entire day hosting this space and then listen to it again, summarizing for patrons. And in the morning, doing researching, connecting with others, exchanging ideas, and even the questions I ask play into the space because the replies inform me what people are thinking, where we can discuss, where we can dig into, what we need to talk about. And they're all very important. So once I get to 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, I believe we'll be about contribution margin positive, and then 100,000 subscribers will get to gross margin positive, and that's still like Rivian level, pretty much. And then operating margin positive is like I'm not even thinking about that right now. We are so far away from that point. Thank you very much, and I will talk to you all on Monday. Enjoy your weekends and take care.